we will look at another info provider, which is ODS. So you've been looking at cube or master data attribute, text or hierarchies, but we have something called ODS. In BSN we call it as DSO, data store object. This is very, very important because in latest versions, when 7.4 SP8, they have given something called advanced DSO. So this forms the base for that. Okay, so this is very, very important. So I'm just creating one info array for. Okay, boss. Let's see theory and then see about. See, creating ODS, loading ODS is very simple. It hardly takes 5 minutes. But the concept behind that is very, very important. You should understand the complete internal architecture. That is very, very important. Now, ODS is a data container. Now, what do you mean by data container? It does hold data physically into it, like how the info cube holds data in it. Same way, ODS also would have data into it, physically staging this. But the cube was a multi-dimensional object with fact table and dimension tables. But ODS is a flat structure. It's like a two-dimensional object. When I say two-dimensional object, it's like normal table, like rows and columns. That's it. Like normal table. It's a flat structure. And DSO works with override functionality. What is the functionality of cube? Additive. Cube is additive, but here ODS works with over. By default is override, but it can still work with additive also. Default functionality of ODS is override, but it can still work out with additive functionality also. Okay. Now, similar to cube, how we have different types of cubes. In ODS also we have different types of ODS, like standard ODS, direct update ODS, write automate DSO. Yeah. But now we are focusing on standard DSO. As part of this session, we are only focusing on standard DSO. Okay, good. Now what I mean to say, now look at this. When you create an info cube with all the dimensions and key figures, and when you activate the cube, does it create a lot of tables in the backend? It does create the schema like F table and dimension tables. Similar way, when you create ODS, it does create 3 tables in the backend. One is called as active table, and one is called as new table, and one is called as changelog table. So it is going to use this changelog table and overwrite your records. It is going to use these 3 tables and implement this override functionality. But we'll see that in detail. But as it is, when you create an info cube, it does create the schema in the backend with all the F table and dimension tables, right? When you activate the cube. Similar way, when you define the DSO and activate, internally it actually creates 3 tables. One is called as new table, new data table, or they also call it as activation queue. And you'll have one more table called active table and one more table called changelog table. That's how it creates 3 tables in the backend. Clear on this? And by default, ODS functionality is override. When I say override, if you load one record and if you try to load the same record again, it goes and overrides. But whereas the cube, it keeps adding up the records, it's additive in nature. But ODS is default is override, but you can still set it as addition also. That's about ODS. Now, next question is, next point, look at this. I told it does create 3 tables, right? Now, when you create a cube, it is creating your fact table. And does it have certain naming like /bi, C or 0? C in case of customized cube and 0 in case of standard cube, /f and the cube name, right? Similar way, even the new table, active table, changelog would have certain naming convention how the table gets created in the backend, the naming of the table here. For new table, it will be /bi, C or 0, /a and the ODS name 40. That will be a new table, which is nothing but activation queue. And the same naming, if the table ends with 00, that will be your active table. New table and activation queue. This is called as active table, active data table. Okay. and active table ends with what? 00. New table ends with 40. And for changelog there is no fixed number, but we only know one thing, it starts with /BAC/B000 and some number comes out. That's how the 3 tables are created that's the naming of those 3 tables. Now when we have 3 tables, now what is the purpose of these 3 tables? Now let's say you define a ODS. It's going to have 3 tables in the back end. Now I'm able to create my BEX queries on top of cube. Yeah, we can also create BEX queries on top of ODS also. We can do reporting on top of DSO also. Okay. Now let's say I've got DSO. When I say DSO, it will have 3 tables in it. And when I do reporting on top of this DSO, from which table does it fetch the data from? That's the point. Get what I'm saying? So it fetches from active data tables. Even though the DSO contains 3 tables in it, when the reporting is done on it, it only fetches data from active table for reporting. So as long as I don't take the data to the active table, I cannot consider the loading is completed. Why? Because when you do executive reporting on DSO, standard DSO, it actually shows data from which table? Active table. So if I am loading it to DSO, until I take the data to the active table, I cannot consider my loading is completely done. Okay, numbers. Next. Okay, if the reporting is done on the active table, then what is the purpose of new table and what is the purpose of change log table? Now look at this one. Let's say you create DSO, and loading data into the DSO will be same like cube. You create data source, you will create transformations, info package, DTP bus. So when you run the info package, data comes to data source. When you run the DTP, it gets it from data source to what? DSO. The cube get DSO good. But what are the data you load through DTP? It actually first enters into new data tables, or nothing but activation queue, which is 40. First no DTP run చేసినప్పుడు ODS లో డేటా పోయిందంటే ఏ టేబుల్ కి వెళ్తుంది? న్యూ టేబుల్ కి వెళ్తుంది. ఓకే అన్నమాట. Once data is moved into new table, you do another operation called activation, activating the data in ODS or DSO. So once the data is loaded into new table, you basically go to perform an operation called activating the data in DSO. When you perform this process of activation, what it does, it takes one record from new table and finds what is the primary key for this. I told it's like a table, right? It will have primary key. It finds out what is the primary key in it. Once it finds the primary key, then it checks the active table whether do we already have a record with the same primary key or not. If it finds a record already with the same primary key, it goes and overwrites it. Otherwise it acts as a new record. Adi. First load చేసినప్పుడు న్యూ టేబుల్కి వస్తాను. ఎప్పుడైతే యాక్టివేషన్ చేసాం, యాక్టివేషన్ అప్పుడు ఏం జరుగుతుందంటే న్యూ టేబుల్ ఒక రికార్డ్ తీసుకుంటుంది. ఈ రికార్డులో ప్రైమరీ కీ చూసుకుని ఈ ప్రైమరీ కీ కాంబినేషన్తో యాక్టివ్ టేబుల్ ఎంట్రీ ఉందా, లేకపోతే కొత్త రికార్డ్కి యాడ్ చేస్తుంది, ఉంటే పోయి ఆ రికార్డ్కి ఓవర్ రైట్ చేస్తుంది. Getting this? So when you perform the activation process, it takes a record from the new table, checks what is my key field value, and then checks whether do we already have a record in the active table with the same key field value or not. If you already have a record, it goes and overwrites. If not, it acts as a new record. Whenever it does perform an operation of adding a new record or overwriting existing record, it keeps formulating the entries in the change log table, like registry, saying kotta record vachina overwrite aina, it makes an entry in the change log saying this record has come in newly, this record is overwritten, and it makes an entry of all the changes in change log table. Change log table, log of all the changes of the transactions will be written to what? Change log table. So when does the data get it active table? It's not when you run DTP, it only goes into what? New table, activation queue. And when you perform the activation process in ODS, then only it moves data from new table to what? Active table. When it is moving in, it either acts as a new record or overwrites as an existing record. Whenever it acts as a new record, in the change log it maintains saying new record has been added. If it overwrites in change log, it maintains entry saying new record, one record has been overwritten. All the log of changes has been written into which table? Change log table. And once it is activated, data moves into what? Active table. Now when I do reporting, it fetches from where? Active table to reporting. This is ODS. Now what is it? No, not PS. You cannot do any editing, not PS. Like a queue. That's what I say. Activation queue. All the records before getting active, they stay in a queue like this in table. Then once the activation system keeps taking data from new table and puts into active table. and when it's putting it active table, then that is where it overwrites, and when it does the overwriting, it maintains it respect to log in the change log table. Clear on this? Okay, good. Now let's go to defining. How do we define ODS now? Generally, if you look at while creating cube, when you say create info cube, you get out a dialog box where you specify the technical name of the cube and description and say create, type of the cube and say create. Then you in the dimensions folder you decide how many dimensions you want. You assign the characteristics to it. For the keywords folder you specify what keywords you want inside the fact table. Similar way, when you are trying to create a DSO, when it says say create new DSO, it does open up a screen where you basically specify the technical name and description and say create. You get into the next screen. In the next screen you basically have two things. One is key fields, data fields. Basically two folders you will have. Key fields and data fields. So basically what you do is whatever the info objects you want as primary key. I told you based on the primary key it will override the records order. Whatever the info objects you want them as primary key in this DSO, you put them into key fields. And whatever the keys you want them as data fields, put them into data fields. But don't get into understanding saying I need to put characteristics into key fields into data fields. Any info object you want them to act as primary key in the active table of DSO. In which table? Active table of DSO. Set them into key fields. And any info object which you want them to act as non-key columns in the active table, you put them into data fields. Maximum number of key fields is 16. Maximum number of data fields is 749. Maximum number of key fields is 16 and maximum number of data fields is 749. We cannot include key figures into key fields. Can you ever imagine a key figure like revenue acting as primary key? Never, right? So key figures cannot get into key fields. Like time characteristic, normal characteristic can all go into key fields. But only thing is key field, what is that you will place into key fields? Any info object, whatever you place into key fields will act as primary key into which table was? Active table. And based on that primary key values only the overwriting will happen. Depending on the overwriting what you want, you place them in key fields. Maximum number of key fields is 16. Because it's a limitation of database that we can only have a table with composite key of what? Max 16 columns. And maximum number of data fields is how much? 749. Clear on this bus? Okay. Everyone is clear till here? Yeah? Good. Now let's say, now look at this now. Let's say I've created, before we go on to the system and create a DSO, I'm trying to show you how are those three tables created in the backend, how are those tables have been manipulated in the backend. Then we'll just create ODS and then load and see the same thing practically in the system. Let's say I'm creating an ODS called ZO underscore sales. That's my technical name of the ODS. And I've just given a description as what? Sales DSO. And it would have key fields and it will have what? Data fields. In key fields I gave it as customer and what? Cal month. In data fields I gave it as region, amount and currency. 3. That's it, simple. So in the backend, when I activate now the DSO, should it create those three tables in the backend? New, active and change log? Yes or no? Yeah? Good. Now before that, now see, key field concept chala important. Most of the people get confused here. We should understand a word called granularity. At what granularity do you want to store your data? For example, now in this case I've got customer and month as my primary key. Now let's say my customer C1 performed some transaction in the month of January. I load it. Okay. Now again customer C1 has performed a transaction in the month of Feb. Again I load in. Will it add as new record or will it go into override? Customer number is same. Will it go into override or add up? It will add. Why? Because it checks the uniqueness. It checks the uniqueness of the record based on the complete key field value combination. What is my key field value combination? Customer and month. C1 with January is different from C1 with Feb, right? So when I say customer with month, granular, what is the level of detail I am maintaining? For a particular customer, for a month specific, I have got data being maintained. For example, if I take out this month and put that into data fields. Now what is the granularity I maintain my data? Customer wise. పలానా కస్టమర్కి పలానా మంత్ స్పెసిఫిక్ డేటా పెడుతున్నానంటే ఇట్ ఇస్ వాట్ గ్రాన్యులారిటీ వాస్ మంత్ లెవెల్. సో డిపెండింగ్ ఆన్ ద కీ ఫీల్డ్ కాంబినేషన్స్ యూ డిసైడ్ at what granularity do you want to maintain your database. For example, look at this now. You are extracting sales order item data. Item ante one sales order can have multiple line items. Suppose let's say I've got sales order 1 with item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you define a ODS only with sales order number as a key. Then will all these items go and override and only one item is left out in the DSO. So at what granularity am I maintaining database? Header level, sales document number level. But if it's a sales document number and item number both as primary key, so will all these items go and sit as a new records? Because if order number is same, item number is different. So what is the granularity? Item level data. Only order level data undi. Item unte order and item specific data atla. No key fields దాన్ని బట్టే ఏ granularity ఎంత డీటెయిల్ granularity detail ఎంత డీటెయిల్ గా డేటా పెడుతున్నావు. Depending on the key field, you decide at what granularity or what detail level the data has been maintained. That's the importance. ఊరిని గుడ్డుగా 16 క్యారెట్స్ దానిలో పెడదాం మిగిలిన దీంట్లో అట్లా కాదు పాయింట్. నీకు ఏ లెవెల్లో డేటా కావాలి. Based on that, you would be deciding about your key field combinations. Clear? And maximum would be ఇంకా నాకు 16 కంటే ఎక్కువ మనం ఏం చేయలేము. చేతులు ఎత్తేయడం నో ఆప్షన్. ఓకే బస్ ఫైన్. Clear till you understood about key fields. And one more option is key figures cannot come into that. Can I place amount into my key fields? No. You cannot drag them into that. Key fields not possible. Okay, good. Till this clear?
So if I do 2 transactions in 1 month for the same customer, so
if I do 2 transactions the same month, it is going to override.
But the sales,
it's going to override. Now you don't want them to override, right? Then you say if the same customer performs multiple times the same month, unless I have transaction number, then put transaction number also into that. So transaction number, customer and month. See in 1 month there could be 2 transaction numbers. Transaction number 1 for the first transaction, transaction number 2 for the second transaction. So that's what, depending on what granularity you want, you will have to decide about your key field combinations. And based on the key field combination only the records will be overwriting. Okay. So now does it go to create 3 tables in the backend? Good. And every table will have some structure. Structure అంటే now 3 tables create అయితే కదా ఆ 3 tables లో ఏమేం కాలమ్స్ ఉంటాయి. When I say what is the structure of these 3 tables, we are trying to understand what is the composition of these tables. What columns does it have? I am creating this DSO with these key fields, with this data fields. So 5 columns. So do we have the table with 5 columns or 10 columns? 5. What columns will you have? Another point. We should get that understanding now. Now look at the ODS architecture. First let's go into this. Which table? Active table. Look at the naming. What is your ODS name? Z2O underscore sales. So what is the naming of your active table? /BAC/A Z2O underscore sales 00. 00 is your active table. Okay, మరి దాని స్ట్రక్చర్ ఏముంది అంటే వాట్ కాలమ్స్ విల్ ఇట్ హ్యావ్ అంటే ప్రైమరీ కీ ఫీల్డ్స్ నథింగ్ బట్ కీ ఫీల్డ్స్ ప్లస్ డేటా ఫీల్డ్స్ అండ్ దెన్ అనదర్ కాలమ్ తో రికార్డ్ మోడ్. యాక్టివ్ టేబుల్ స్ట్రక్చర్ ఏముంటుందంటే నువ్వు ఏవైతే కీ ఫీల్డ్స్ ఇచ్చినా ఆ కీ ఫీల్డ్స్, డేటా ఫీల్డ్స్ ఏమి ఇచ్చినా ఆ డేటా ఫీల్డ్స్ అట్లా 5 కాలంలో వచ్చాయి ప్లస్ 1 more column called record mode. I will discuss on the record mode later, but it will have another extra column called record mode. Okay, and the key fields will act as primary key in this table. That's why I colored them as blue. So as per your ODS design, where my customer number and month was the key fields, amount, region and currency were the data fields. What should be the columns? Customer number, cal month, amount, region, currency, and customer and cal month are the primary key, and one more extra column is what? Record mode. What is the primary key in this active table? Key fields. Key fields will be the primary key in this table. That is what going to play the game. That is what going to maintain the level of granularity what you want. Done? Okay. Now next, that is about with 00. Next, let's go to the new table, which is nothing but also called as activation queue or new data table. Anything it is okay. Okay. And this would have the naming as same /BAC/A ODS name and what 40. Now what is the structure of this table? It will have key fields, it will have data fields, it will have record mode. All this will be the same as active, plus it will have three technical keys: request number, data packet, record number. Request number, data packet, record number. It will have three columns extra. Okay. Now what is this SID, what is this data packet, what is this record number? This request is nothing but, I told you, you will have ODS. You will connect the data source to DSO with the help of transformations, and when you run the DTP, when you run the DTP to load into DSO, into which table does it data enter into? No, DTP కొట్టినప్పుడు DSO లో ఏ టేబుల్ డేటా వస్తుంది? న్యూ డేటా టేబుల్ కి వస్తుంది కదా. సో data, when you trigger a DTP, data actually enters into what? New data table only, right? So in the new data table, I should be able to recognize these records have come in with which request. Every time you run DTP, does it generate a request number? Yes. Every time you run the DTP, does it generate a request number? That request number is what it comes in. In fact, to speed up the activation process, a request number పెట్టుకోకుండా that request will have SID. It will bring SID of that loading request. Suppose if I load, if look at this now, I am loading DSO. I have run DTP twice. First time when I run the DTP, I have loaded 5 records. Next time when I run the DTP, I have run 3 records. Let's say for first time you run the DTP to generate request R1. Let's say SID is 400. Next time you run DTP, request is R2. Let's say SID is 401. Appudu em vastundi? For first 5 records, you will see SID is what? 400. For next 3 records, you will see SID is what? 401. Adi. It will have the request of SID of what? Loading request. No DTP run chesinapudu edaithe SID generate request number ki SID vastundo, aa SID vachi kuchuntunnadu. So that will tell me through which request what records have come in. That's a queue, right? You should know which request has brought in what records into the queue. Okay, boss? And when you run the DTP, can it process the data in multiple packets? Let's say I'm loading 1000 records and packet size is 500. Now I should know this record belongs to which packet it is. So when you look at 1000 records now, all the requests yesterday would be same, 400, 400, 400, but for first 500, packet number would be 11111. For next 500, the packet number would be what? 222. Then you'll have the record number. Record number, it will have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you just count. You remember the PSA, something like the technical keys. Okay, Rana? And these 3 technical keys will be primary keys. These can never be unique. End record like same undadu. Either request number is different, or packet number is different, or record number is different. It can never be same. So if you load 1000 records will come and sit into this table. That is new table. And what is primary key in this table? SID of the request, data packet, record number. These 3 columns are primary key. That's what I colored them as blue. Okay, boss? Good. Record mode.
Record number will restart from 1 for every data packet which comes in, right?
Yeah, that's it. You saying record number will start counting, restarting from every packet? Yes. Packet 1, 1232, 500. Packet 2, 1232, 500. Next. It will have change log table also, but there is no fixed naming for it. It does go with /BAC/B /000 some number. I will tell you the technique how to catch hold of the table name also. Simple. But what is structure of this table? It will have key fields, it will have data fields, it will have record mode. Then 4 technical keys. It will have what? 4 technical keys. One is not SID, activation request, data packet number, record number, partition number. Don't worry about partition number. Partition number is always 1. Okay. This is like PSA. Change log table is something like PSA. Activation request ఏంటంటే, now look at this. I told you every time you load data into the DSO, I must activate the data. Whenever you schedule the DTP or whenever you run the DTP, it generates one request number. Similar way, for every activation process, it does generate one activation request. Every time you run the DTP, it does generate one request number. That is a DTP request. And every time you activate data into DSO, it also generates one request with the naming as ODSR and also. For DTP it comes as DTPR, but for the ODS activation it comes ODSA and ODSR and so. So for every activation it does generate one request number. So for a particular activation, for this packet, for this record number, what is the change? And log raskuntam. Let's say you load DTP. two records come into new table. You have performed the activation. Now these two records will go and add as new record, let's say. Then it goes to change log. For every, you have done the activation. So we'll have a request number generated was. For this activation request, we had one packet, first record. This is the record. It maintains a complete record. Say it is a new record. For the same activation request, same packet, record number 2, full complete record details, it will come as new record. అట్లా కొత్త రికార్డ్కి వచ్చినాయా, ఓవర్ రైట్ అయినాయా అంటే ఈ పలానా యాక్టివేషన్ రిక్వెస్ట్లో కొత్తగా ఏమేమి వచ్చినాయి, ఓవర్ రైట్ ఏమేమి అయినాయని రాసుకుంటుంది. సో ఫర్ ఎవ్రీ యాక్టివేషన్ ఇట్ కీప్స్ మెయింటైనింగ్ ద లాగ్ ఇంటూ చేంజ్ లాగ్ టేబుల్. Yes or no? So this is how the three structures are created in the backend. Okay, boss? Suppose if I am loading, how does it go through? And I have just took some sample data. Assume this line above is BW, this is source system, whether it could be flat file or ECC, whatever it is. Okay. Now this is my record. Okay. Now every time you want to load into BW, my data is in flat file. I would like to load into DSO. Let's say my data is ready, DSO is ready, both are connected with transformations, info package is created, DTP is created. The entire objects or flow is ready. You just have to trigger the data loading. How do you start? Do you run DTP first or info package first? First you will run info package, so that data will come into data source. Then you will schedule the DTP, then it takes from data source to what? DSO which table? New table. Then you need to perform activation. Antena? So when you activate, then data gets into active, because until unless I load into new table, until unless I load into active table, I cannot consider the request is successful, because when you do reporting, it actually fetches data from what? Active table. So that's where I have to do 3 steps. One is execute info package, execute DTP, then what? Activate data in DSO. Okay? Okay, Namaste? Now one small step here. Generally what happens? You run info package. Data is loaded to data source. Now when you run DTP, it extracts data from data source and load into what? New tables. Since data is loaded only to new table, system cannot understand that request is successfully done, because request can be understood as successful only when the data moves into what? Active table. Because only after complete activation process, system can understand the request is successful. Since DTP finished loading only to new table, it cannot understand it is successfully done, and it will still stay as yellow. Even though your DTP finishes loading data to new table, it still stands as yellow, because it doesn't understand that it is successfully done. That's okay. That is one. So when should it become green? After activation. But the logic is I can do activation only when the request is green. DTP when you run DTP, it loads into new table and still holds it as green, yellow, understanding it's not yet been successfully done. But I need to do, and I can push the data of this request to active table only when the request is green. So before I run the activation process, what do? I'll set the status to green. So 4 steps: execute info package, execute DTP, set the request to green, and then activate. Okay, boss. But see, look at about setting it to green. I should wait. I should keep on seeing DTP to set it to green. I should keep waiting until it finishes loading. Then I should set it to green manually. Instead of doing it manually, what I'll do, I'll have an option. I'll have a checkbox option where if I enable it saying set QM status to OK automatically. As soon as my DTP finishes loading it to what? New table, it will convert the request to green. Then I can do activation. Instead of me waiting until the DTP finishes loading to new table, then converting it to green, I'll enable a checkbox which will automatically convert the request to okay.
Why is the checkpoint of green?
That's what. See, when you do reporting on DSO, where does data come from? Active table. That's why as it is, system does not understand the request to be successful when it moves to new table. But I cannot do activate a request when it is yellow. So what I do, I enable a property which will set it to green. Actually for cube also it is there, but cube the default is enabled. Here we have to enable it manually. That's okay, boss. Very done. Chuddam etla. So that is how I'll be having the 4 steps here. Execute info package, execute DDP, set QM status to OK, then act. But I can automate this step. Actually, I can automate this also. But if I automate, we will not be able to see data at every stage. I am not doing it now.